going to dive right in for any of our guests that or attendees coming later. Thank you if you're watching this later. Thank you. Super excited to have Awaken Pittsburgh at our last event of the school year for Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully, talking about integrating PBIS and mindfulness-based DBT school-wide in collaboration with outside partners. So I'm super ready to nerd out to this, and I'm going to hand it over to you, either Maureen or Stephanie or Will, who would like to kind of give a little synopsis about who you are, what you're up to, and what we're about to dive into this evening.
Yeah, so I can just start and introduce myself. So I'm Stepanie Romero, and I'm the executive director and founder of Awaken Pittsburgh. We're a small nonprofit that does mindfulness and meditation for social and emotional regulation and mental health in a variety of contexts. Educational settings is one of them, but we also work with public safety, healthcare professionals, and in communities with a large amount of trauma where we go in and try to provide services. So that's me.
I'm Will Davies, the founder and director of a program called the Chill Project by Allegheny Health Network. That's the AHN on there. It's a healthcare system that is in Western Pennsylvania around the Pittsburgh area. I'm part of a psychiatry institute there, but what we do is across about 32 schools provide multi-tiered levels of support for kids with behavioral health needs.
Thank you. And Maureen, she is upside down. We did not plan this. We thought, though, you know, it's a unique part of our experience tonight. So I love it. Maureen, what about you?
Just making people concentrate a little bit more.
Yeah, there we go.
So I'm Maureen Shaw, and I am the high school counselor at Clairton City School District. I've been there for about 18 years now. And prior to that, worked in mental health and also worked in mental health while serving there. And we have a partnership with Awaken Pittsburgh and AHN.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Stephanie.
Yeah, so we're going to start with the resourcing practice. And just for a few minutes, the way that I always love to start when I guide a practice is to just ask folks to notice their posture. And maybe you could sit in such a way that you feel upright but relaxed. You feel like you're embodying your worth and dignity in this moment. And this is a practice that you can take with you and do anytime. And we will first start by just noticing any spots in our body that feel positive or neutral. So you can do a quick scan if you want to start at the toes and work your way up to the head. And just notice any spots that feel positive or neutral. And if the negative stands out, that's okay. Just notice that too, but really focusing on positive and neutral sensations in the body at this moment. And now just picking one of those positive or neutral sensations and resting our attention there for just another minute. We'll just take about 30 more seconds. If your mind has wandered, no big deal. Just bringing it back to that positive or neutral sensation. And I will ring a chime here in a second to end. So often our minds are drawn to the negative. So this is a practice where we can intentionally look for the positive and just rest with that. And with that, I will turn it over to Will to do our overview.
Thank you, Stephanie. So in general, what we're going to talk about today is a very innovative program coming together at the intersection of the nonprofit world, the hospital world, and the school district world, and creating a model together to best serve the needs of a school district called the Clairton City School District in Western Pennsylvania. We're going to talk about how this model fits into the structure of positive behavior support systems within the school, how it's spread out between how it's spread out over the entire school K-12, as well as kind of breaking apart some of the outcomes and what it looks like and how this has impacted the student and teacher population. And I think it's very important to note that this collaboration is for everyone in the school, not just for the students. It's all also about the adults in the school as well. Stephanie.
Thank you. So there is a lot of research going on in the project. We do pre and post surveys with educators and pre and post checks with students. And these questions actually come from the educator survey that we used at the beginning of our project, and then have used a couple of times since to check in. So I just wanted you to reflect on this for yourself. So on the scale from never, sometimes, frequently, or always, if you could just notice for yourself in the last month how often you felt nervous or stressed, and in the last month, how often you might have found that you couldn't cope with all the things you had to do, and in the last month, how often you've been angered because of things that were outside of your control. And I will just say that in general, this is a stress symptomology survey. And when we administer this to educators, depending on the time of year, we tend to find pretty high levels of stress. And that last one, if you notice that it's talking about anger, that also could potentially be a symptom of burnout or compassion fatigue. Right? And so I'm just curious with the folks here, either with a thumbs up, was there anything that you answered without revealing too much, frequently or always, that you experienced in the last month? Did you have any question without actually telling me which question that you were feeling frequently or always?
Well, I just want to hop on and say, I feel like the first question, that's kind of, there's a little stress every day. There's just so much things happening in the world that we live in today. So there's a lot to manage. And I also feel, going to the last one, being angered, maybe frustrated, upset. I would probably include a few other words outside of, my control. Certainly feeling triggered by things. Absolutely. So I could look at this and say, gosh, thank goodness that I have some tools to cope with these things, because if I didn't, I would be more of a hot mess than I am.
Totally agree. Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that. Now I'll kick it over to Maureen.
So here's some just the statistics about mental health in our country. And if, again, we can just take a look at some of these statistics, and if there's any of those that just kind of stand out to you or resonate with you, someone wants to comment or put in the chat why the statistics stood out for them. So all of these statistics on here show the need for mental health support. For me, one of the ones that stood out is 1 in 5 children have a diagnosable mental health condition, because I work with children every single day. And I know that 1 in 5 are not receiving mental health treatment. And then I see on the chat, so many people are experiencing mental health issues. Would love for us to talk about this more often. Absolutely. Okay, Stephanie. Here are some more statistics. There were definitely some on here that stood out to me. One in particular is the first one. Black children under 13 are twice as likely as white peers to die by suicide. I work in a school district that is primarily African American, multiracial students. So for me, this hit home to see that statistic. Anything else on there that someone wanted to comment on the chat or say something about?
I will just say that the last one really hit me hard, especially there's a lot in the news around restricting access to care for trans kids and, different things in the conversations. And even prior to some of that, the statistic of 50% of youth having suicidality as one of the things going on with them is stark.
And I see in the chat, so someone had mentioned 60% of teens didn't get treatment.
Yep.
Yep. And the next one has to do with the educators. So just take a notice of that and let us know what stands out to you. More than 75% of teachers reported frequent job-related stress compared to 40% of other working adults. So I can attest to this, working in a school district with high levels of trauma. One of the things that appealed to me about this program was the emphasis on the whole community. It's all the educators, not just the teachers, the paraprofessionals, the administration, the secretarial staff. So that's one of the reasons that I really was excited about this program when we first discussed it, because if the adults in the building are not okay, the kids are not okay. And then there was a 6% of the teachers surveyed received counseling support from their school district this past year. So more than 75% of teachers reported job-related stress, and 6% of teachers received counseling support. So it's interesting dichotomy there. So where I work, go ahead.
Yeah, something I wanted to share. Was thinking about something I was reading yesterday, and because it is Mental Health Awareness Month, somebody was talking about how do we really infuse this idea of mental wellness meaningfully into cultures, whether in schools or in any kind of corporate setting, any setting. And one of the things, they were talking about is at first being on a leadership team, trying to understand that to be a people person type leader, to understand that the people on your teams, the teachers on your teams are humans, and that because they're going through one crisis right now doesn't mean that another crisis won't pop up 3-4 months from now. And so she had this idea when she started in leadership, like, okay, I'm going to get through this 3 months with this employee. And then 3 months later, another employee had a crisis pop up, right? So the idea that we're humans with complicated things and layers of things happening in our lives, and to normalize that these things happen. I just thought that was interesting, and I really appreciated that perspective. So I do think it's important to understand that we're not trying to get through one crisis, everything's going to be over, and we're going to be this perfect culture with no problems because we're humans and we're always going to have challenges. So it really just adopting how are we going to move forward as a team, knowing that these are going to be popping up in our own lives and others' lives. So
Absolutely. And one of the things that was bothering me was that when you work with children in education, you're always focused on how to support the students through trauma. But as you can see from this slide, we're a small school district. We are essentially removed from Pittsburg City. We're about 35 minutes away, 40 minutes from the city. But we're considered an urban district without any urban resources. So we don't have the resources a city does. It's more of like a steel town that's kind of lost a lot of the resources. So when something happens to one person in the community, it affects most, and it affects our educators. So we're always having trainings and staff development on how to support students, and we're not looking at the adults needing the support because they're experiencing the trauma as well. So you can see, just some statistics that we have K through 12 in one building, which is a huge benefit. We're small. So the breakdown is 67% Black or African American, 3% Hispanic, 12% multiracial, 17% white non-Hispanic. And then according to the PA Future Ready Index, 91% of our students are considered economically disadvantaged. This is me too, right, Stephanie? Okay. So how does the Chill Awaken model fit with PBIS? So it is tiered. It's a tiered model. So they're part of the program looks at serving all staff, all students. So the educational piece or prevention piece involves, from Stefanie's point of view with the Awaken program, is a significant amount of professional development for the educators. Year one, she's going to talk a little bit about that more, but we spent a significant amount of time with mindfulness in the classrooms, mindfulness for educators. And then year two, focus on trauma, and she'll speak to that a little bit more. And then for all students, K through 12, through the Chill program, they receive monthly mindfulness lessons, emotional regulation lessons. So every single student is exposed to that. So that was another thing that appealed to me about this program, is that everyone is being reached. So some of those kids that we think are doing just fine, and some of those adults that we think are doing just fine, they're going to be giving the resources to use or not use, whatever works for them. So that's what I like about this model. Tier 2 support, we have support groups. So we have established those for the students through the Chill program. And then tier 3, we have 2 full-time therapists on site through the Chill program for the students. And then one thing that Dr. Davies put in place that I advocated for was a therapist for the educators. So that was very important to me. So it was provided to the educators that they could receive virtual therapy through AHN. And I was so thrilled. I was one of the first to take advantage of it, and was so happy that there's a focus on the whole culture of the school. So there's several tiers here that everyone is being reached where they need support. The other thing is we have bi-weekly meetings where we touch base on students that visit the chill room. So the other thing is that they can come for tier 2 as needed. If a student is escalated, maybe they just got bad news, they're having difficulty, they get a pass from their teacher, they go in, they do a stress thermometer check-in. They're taught an emotional regulation technique. They talk to the chill educator. They rate themselves on the way out and get back into the classroom. That process is supposed to take about 15 minutes, depending on the situation. You know, they may need more if it's a significant crisis, or they may be referred to the counselor or the social worker for further support. I think this is you, Stephanie.
Yeah. So the thing that is kind of interesting is that PBS does provide us with this kind of tiered way of intervening depending on the need of the student, and it really focuses on how to reward pro-social behaviors, right? And mindfulness, if we think about it, is actually giving kids the skill set to better enact those pro-social behaviors. So I really kind of look at it at two sides of the same coin, so to speak, because you can reward them all you want, but if a kid doesn't have the skill set to begin with, it's going to be really, really hard for them to, get that reward, right? And I don't know, Maureen, if you had anything else you wanted to say about that. That was just my really brief.
Oh, for sure. So, we implement PBS K through 12, and we also use restorative practices, which is integrated in this as well. And I think you kind of need all three. So the PBIS to reward and support the desired behaviors, have the common expectations, those sorts of things. But when you're dealing with trauma, when you're dealing with significant grief and loss, someone giving you a ticket for being respectful and responsible, you can't work through that. It's bigger than that. And so that's just some of that additional support. So I see, some of the tier 1 supports for PBIS, it's just not enough. And I think that the tier 2 is some of the things that we're looking at for mental health, tier 2 responses through PBIS. So it all plays together.
Thanks, Maureen. And now, Will, if you want to go into any more depth on what you're doing with Chill.
Absolutely. So thank you both. So the idea of the Chill Project, I just want to take you back a couple of years pre-pandemic, where there was a mental health crisis happening, except we weren't talking about it as much. And I was working within 2 school districts at that time, and one school district has a very high poverty level, high community trauma, high community violence. And there were 5 kids that year who were shot and killed in the community out on the streets. And then there's another district I was working in that had a lot of resources, a lot of affluence, and there were 5 kids who killed themselves in that district. Maureen, it's good to see you down from the ceiling. And what struck me at that time was that kids were dying in both of these places, and they were very different demographics. And what I saw in the healthcare industry at that time was that you had to have insurance, and you had to have a diagnosis. And if you had that, you could get services in a school, maybe by a therapist who was kind of bouncing around between schools, or they had to send you to a clinic and that kind of thing. There really wasn't like a preventative solution to what was happening. Oftentimes, the prevention was put onto folks like Maureen in the schools, the school counselors. However, the school counselors are stretched out beyond capacity, even before COVID, where they're firefighting all day. They're only looking at concerns that they're legally obligated to do because that's all they have time for. And there's so many of them that all these kids were falling through the cracks. And so the essence and the idea behind the Chill Project is getting into that pathway of death and suffering and disrupting it to help bring life to these kids. And so what we do is, like Stephanie was talking about with PBIS, we also look at the MTSS model, multi-tiered systems of support. On a tier 1 basis, what we do is we have a curriculum that we facilitate to all of the students. In other schools, we take it to the teachers as well, but in this school, Stepanie and her group's doing an awesome job of giving a very robust version of that with what they're doing. And that is something we can either push into the classrooms or they come into a space that we call the chill room, which is a designated classroom space that is there for all folks. It's not supposed to be the room for those kids, or like you go there because you're, a bad kid or something like that. This is a space that all the students have available to them for additional supports, which is where Tier 2 comes from. In Tier 2, you get a student or a teacher can come to the chill room. And we have a designated time for teachers, so you don't have crossover there, where students come in and we've picked up on everything from a little bit of test anxiety to I've taken a whole bottle of Tylenol and literally an organ failure to something that was kind of unintended in the original design of the program, which is we're picking up on school violence before it's happening. And we've picked up on some kids who've had pretty detailed plans and weapons and lists and things like that. And we were able to get in front of that. And so that at the end of the day is fulfilling our mission, which is getting into the pathway and disrupting student death. And that's—
Will, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Because I'm super curious, was it the students that came to you? Was there some process that made you aware that these things were happening? Some system that you had in place?
That's a great question. So part of the design that's very intentional is the person who facilitates Tier 1 and Tier 2 is in the school 5 days a week. They become a part of that culture. They get the trust and the buy-in of the community. And in Clarendon, it was really important that the folks in these chill rooms were reflective of the community as well, to continue to have that, to have further buy-in. And so because of that, in those positive relationships, those deep trusting relationships that are formed, it comes up in the conversation and they build those bonds with those adults. And it's really important. A lot of these kids that have a lot of loss in their lives, and adults are coming and going. And these folks who are there that we bring in are committed to being there for those kids. They're always showing up so those kids can show up, because those kids are so used to adults coming and going. And that's another source of loss for those students as well. So,
well, can I jump in too? Because
go ahead, Lauren.
I have a specific example. So when they started last year, we had a young lady and her sisters come to our chill educator and report that their mom said she wanted to take her own life. And so the chill therapist got involved. The chill educator got me and the social worker involved, and we sent police for a welfare check. And mom was okay. The girls were pretty shaken up still. But at that point, we kind of debriefed about it all. And I spoke with the chill therapist at the time, and she said, I still don't feel good about this. I don't want these girls coming home to something that could be tragic. So the principal and I drove the girls home, went in and checked on the mother. And so that's just another good example of how they trust these chill educators. And our chill educator this year in the high school was voted the favorite teacher by the seniors.
And is giving a speech at graduation too, from what I've heard.
Yes.
So, which is awesome.
Yes.
So you can see how the trust is really baked in there. And so each of these spaces, so there's one person on Tier 2 and tier 1 and 2, and then Tier 3 is your kind of more formalized outpatient therapy that happens within a school. And so that is another person that is there 5 days a week as well. And because Clarendon is K-12, we actually have 4 individuals in that school, 2 chill rooms and with 2 chill educators, and then 2 therapists. And then, as Maureen had said earlier, we connect them in with, we can connect teachers in with higher levels of care as well. Medication management is also in our system if certain kids or teachers need that. And then last thing to really emphasize is that we are there in a very deep and profound way when there's a tragedy, which unfortunately is something that happens way too often in Clarendon. And it's something that has been compounded over the years. There's decades and decades of tragedy that have happened in that community. And so when that happens, there was a student who unfortunately was shot and killed in January. And we pulled the resources in and had multiple layers of therapists, therapy dogs, all kinds of different things going on in the school to support the school. So we can, when there's that kind of a tragedy, we come in and we come in deep.
And just to add to that, that was an unexpected benefit of the program. In addition to supporting the students for several weeks after the tragedy, it was a 13-year-old who was shot and killed. So it was very, very traumatic for all of us. They provided, the superintendent decided that the day after it happened, she canceled school. We just needed a day to get everything together. The next day, all of the providers got together and they provided training the following day. It was just an in-service day, remote learning for the students. And they provided training. First half of the day was on trauma for students. And then they had time. Therapy dog was there. There was support for the teachers if they needed to go, the staff. And then second of half of the day was about trauma for educators and how it affects them. And again, that there was support. So it wasn't you had to be in training all day. It was you were there for about an hour and then you sought out the support, whether that's talking to your colleagues or visiting these professionals, that was provided. So I think that the superintendent took the lead of the mental health professionals in this case, and it was very well received.
Great, thank you both. So just to kind of shift gears for a quick second, you know, stress, and we could have had trauma in the top line here too, probably we should have, really has an impact on our bodies. And so these are just a few of the examples of actual physical disease that occurs with long-term acute stress, right? And so we want to acknowledge that long-term trauma and community-based trauma, historical trauma, has some of the same impacts on our bodies. And so what Will and I and Maureen have really talked a lot about and thought a lot about is, you know, how do we start to give not just educators, but students and educators together, a whole community, respite, right, and healing from what's going on in the environment. And the other thing to kind of understand is that once we're kind of triggered in our stress response or our trauma response, which you often hear is fight, flight, freeze, right? We're not able to fully engage the part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, that actually learns, right? And so we have these negative physiological symptoms that come about with long-term stress and trauma, but we also know that when we're kind of in distress for any reason, and that distress could be real in the moment, or it could be imagined or triggered from the past, kids and educators no longer are fully functioning, rational individuals. You know, like that expression that we have, oh, so and so totally lost it, right? It actually has a brain-based reason that it's going on. So just to kind of frame the work that we're doing is really trying to address both the long-term and the short-term impacts of trauma and stress to create an environment where kids are able to learn and teachers are able to show up and be their full selves and compassionate. Great. And now Will's going to give a little description of the elementary chill room.
Awesome, thank you. So these are just some pictures of some of the different areas. You know, it's a full-blown classroom, as you can see. We recently had an art installation put in there. Clairton's mascot is the Bears, and so we have a thing called the Bears Den that we've created. It's actually where the swings are now, that the kids can go inside of, and it's like they're going in the belly, and it's very comfortable, and there's nice lighting and carpet and all that kind of great stuff in there. And there's different spaces within the room, and it's flexible to be able to do classroom instruction, as you see in the middle picture, but also individual needs as well on tier 2. And we try to make it very inviting and try to make it look at in a way that isn't typical of a classroom. We do a lot of tracking on, you know, how many kids come in and come out and what they're there for, and the effectiveness of it. And so, you know, here's just some from the elementary chill room, what it looked like on a monthly basis for kids coming in for individual drop-ins. We also do groups. Something that we really pride ourselves in the program is it's very open-ended. So if we don't like just have a program and, you know, it's not your microwavable macaroni and cheese and everybody gets the same thing. Like, This is a program that it can be adjusted to the emergent needs of the community as it's happening. So if we see that there's a group of kids who have a significant sensory concerns going into the lunchroom, we can create a group for them around that. If there's a group of kids who need social skills, who need a social skills group, we can do that, and so on and so forth. And then you can see that, we also have faculty members that use it as well. And those are the ones that come in directly for the chill room versus there's a lot of consultations that happen kind of in the hallway and in the classrooms as well. So, okay, this is year 2, and you can sort of see how we've made some adjustments. There's an interest group that meets weekly that started in October. We do have more data than this, so I apologize that one only goes to October. And then we also push out to parents as well. And then our high school chill room. There's also a Bears Den in this space, which is not in this picture. This is a much larger space, and same kind of concept where there's flexible seating, very comfortable. We're making sure all the senses are taken care of in here. It smells good, it feels good, looks good, and it's calming. These are our drop-ins for 21, 22. Always interesting to see the, that March and April spike that ends up happening.
Yeah, and just to mention, April is a testing month, so they don't have as many opportunities to drop in, but still do quite often.
That's right. And through October of this year.
What has buy-in been like from the teachers and the staff? Is it a combination of the PD that you're giving with, the results that they're seeing and, students experiencing this, using it, advocating for their needs, using these tools? I'm curious how you guys have come across perhaps resistance, both from teacher facing, student facing, and how you have navigated some of those temporary, perhaps, roadblocks.
So can I start on that, Stephanie, and then I'll pass to you? Okay. Big time resistance from teachers, because what we found, and thankfully, because of Stephanie's skilled program deliverers, we realized that a lot of the resistance has to do with the faculty's trauma that they've experienced. And so there were people calling off on PD days for mindfulness. There was a lot of mindfulness again, and people frustrated with it. And I was frustrated because this was my baby, and I wanted this so bad for my colleagues who I knew were struggling as I was struggling, and I wanted to support them. And why weren't they seeing how important this was, and why weren't they doing this? Until Stephanie, and her program delivers helped me to see through my own discovery and going through the process that, it's just a manifestation of an unmet need. And that's what we're seeing. And so there were a lot of lessons learned. I think that the staff bought in a lot more for the students right away, but because of funding purposes, like because of how we receive funding for the program, we did not implement it all together. We started with Awaken for the educators, and the chill wasn't implemented until January. So it started in August for the educators, and then not until January for the students. So I think that created some issue. But Stephanie definitely had some lessons with program delivery for her side. So I'll let her speak to that.
Yeah, thanks, Maureen. So Awaken Pittsburgh started, as Maureen said, in August of 2021. We had delivery that whole year. And from August to January, we did our educator program. there's around 100 faculty and staff at Clairton, so we had 4 groups of around 25, and each group received, I think it was 16 hours of professional development that was all about how do you practice mindfulness for your own social emotional regulation, for your own health and well-being. And we tried not to even talk about students. We tried to just say, like, how do you work with your stress? How do you support your own self-care? All of the things, right? And as Maureen said, some of the educators didn't even want to go there. You know, they entered the space already decided that this program was not going to work for them. And so we really tried as best we could to meet people where they were. You know, just honestly, if they didn't show up, we didn't take attendance and report that to the administration, or if they were calling off, we, let it go. And then part 2 came around in January, and that part was training educators to support the work that was going to happen in the chill room with mindfulness in the classroom for students. And so we tried to teach them a trauma-sensitive approach to bringing in mindfulness for social and emotional regulation in any moment that they wanted to during the school day for kids. So we did that. I think it was about 12 hours total of that program. So you can see the district was really invested in it and gave us so much of their PD time. And so just a little deeper dive. So that first program is really just how do you develop a mindfulness practice? How do you cope with stress? How can you help support yourself be more resilient? And we also did compassion and empathy training. And we did psychoeducation around the stress response, trauma response, and when you feel triggered, how do you identify that? And then what are techniques you can use to kind of self-regulate and dial it back down? And then the classrooms was really all about how to be trauma informed. And, I'm a former K-12 educator, and like we're trained that all the kids are in lockstep. You're on the same page, in the same book, you take the same assessment, maybe some modifications for certain kids, but everyone's kind of got to do the same thing. And what we really tried to emphasize is like, one thing about mindfulness is not everyone's going to be able to do the same thing. And so how do you pull in choice? How do you give options to folks? And just to go back to the opening practice I guided for you, I asked you to find positive and neutral spots on your body and sensations, but I never suggested what that would look like, feel like, or where it would be. And so the choice that I built in there was for you to scan where you felt comfortable, notice what felt good for you, and pick a spot that felt good for you. And that was your resource in this moment. Maybe tomorrow it'll be different, but really working intentionally to help teachers understand that it's a whole different thing to teach mindfulness and to get supports to kids through practice.
And I think it was a struggle with administration too, because it's just the mindset that everybody needs to be there and this is required, and take attendance and make sure. And they were frustrated because they were devoting a lot of PD time to something they felt was beneficial, and teachers were getting notes from therapists to excuse themselves from mindfulness, ironically. And but Stepanie really tried to drive home the point of choice, that if we want to teach the students choice, we have to allow the educator's choice. And that's hard for administrators
Very
to
hard.
understand.
Very hard. And I guess I just want to say there too, like, if you are so busy being busy to avoid feeling your feelings, asking someone to get still and notice is the most threatening thing, right? And so we have this group of educators that have huge amount of trauma. There's one educator, I think Maureen, you told me the story. She had been in Clairton 20 years and had 20 students or close family die by gun violence in the 20 years she had been there. So that's holding a lot, right? And so if you're busy avoiding those feelings and you haven't really deeply processed, me telling you get still and notice what's going on in your body is re-traumatizing, right? But in spite of that, we did see a significant decrease of teacher burnout. And then when we kind of got to that part 2, that was from our part 1, I told you we did some research. We did see that there were significant increases in the self-report data on people saying they understood now what mindfulness practices with kids look like. They understood how to use them, and that they were bringing it into their classrooms, which 19% there was a 19% increase just from January to May. So I feel like, yes, there was a lot of resistance, but there was also buy-in from a certain cohort of educators that began implementing. And I saw you unmute. Did you want to ask or comment on something?
Yeah, I had in my mind, and I'm curious, when you guys start your first PD or you're just introducing material, is this not idea, but the fact that resistance is a natural part of the process,
Yep.
discussed, and I know
Mhm.
it's a self-discovery. Most of the time we're resistant, we don't know we're resistant. So,
Totally,
there's some denial
totally.
happening. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. And I mean, I think the program delivers tried to reframe that for people and be like, if that's what's coming up with you, just notice that and be with that. But then even that suggestion, I think pissed some people off, right? Because, they just didn't want to be there, it just bottom line. And I view that as it's information, and this is conversations that Maureen and I've had, like, that's information, right? If people are that resistant, that's information about what's going on with them. And my advice to my program delivers was just let them leave if they need to leave. Like, it's okay to not be able to do mindfulness right now in this moment. That's okay. I've had those moments in my personal life where I was so upset or something so big was going on that I couldn't sit and meditate. I chose a physical practice or something else that was going to resource me. But yeah, totally. Like, I think our team really viewed it as a symptom of how much trauma was there, but the frustration, and I get the administration and what Maureen expressed, like the frustration of, like, we're giving you all this time and it's supposed to be helping you and you don't even want to show up, right?
Yeah. I think, and thank you for sharing that. I think the the big V word, scary, the vulnerability is,
Yes.
hard. And I feel like that anyone that is facilitating, the more that they can show some of that vulnerability, I think it's such a great seed that they're planting. I've just personally seen the impact of resistance on either side, student, teacher, and some of the most resistant students that I've seen are the ones at the end of the school year that are teaching their classmates the tools that they've been resisting all year, or that are then engaging in conversations with their parents about buying certain things to have at home and wanting to lead practices. So, I think those stories are nice to share. I think that's an important piece to just, remind others that it's not, even though it feels magical sometimes, there's just a lot of hard work to
Absolutely.
navigate through, and
Absolutely.
like sharing those stories of how other people were resistant or how we were ourselves resistant, and what made the difference for us to go beyond that roadblock that we were meeting.
So I'm just noticing time, so we don't have a whole lot more. So I'm going to kind of just skip quickly through the next few slides to just give a little update on where we're at, because that was all about mostly last school year. Anyways, we have just some quotes from educators. I just want to highlight the last one where someone actually on the open-ended post survey said it was a nice opportunity to be heard. And so, gist of this is there were people that felt heard and appreciated the space and benefited from it. The administrators all met in a separate group last year, and they did also, in large part, find benefit of it. And I just want to highlight the second to the last one. This person even commented that they were feeling the impact in their personal life as well. So this is just a little graphic that kind of is our model that we can increase attention, observation, and compassion through mindfulness practices. And it does have that ripple effect out to all of these benefits in the educational space so that we are increasing well-being. So in this school year, because of the high level of trauma, we really sat down with administration and said, what should we do for year 2? And we decided to do a whole program to, 1, hopefully help teachers feel more supported and cared for, and 2, focus on trauma. And so in November, every teacher got to experience a half day of self-care. It was opposite of their teacher-parent conferences, so they got to rotate through whatever they wanted, as they had choice to pick what they wanted. And the rest of the PD time was really looking at what is trauma, how prevalent is it, how does it show up in us, how does it show up in our students, and how can we kind of work with it in ourselves and others. So we really spent a lot of time talking about that this year. And I don't know, Maureen, if you want to make any quick comment about the experience this year. It was, again, mandatory. Administration didn't want to give choice, and I'll just say for next year, we are offering choice.
Yeah, so this year they had the administration in with the teachers, which we were unsure about. But I can say in my group, my principal, when you talked about vulnerability, he was the first to participate. He was the first to like offer things. And I think it just, you could feel a collective sigh that people felt like they could then share. And so I think it ended up working better than I had anticipated, at least in the group I was in. And then I wanted to comment on the self-care day, is that I remember looking at a colleague and saying, we're getting paid for this. I got a Reiki massage, and I participated in what was it? And I actually accidentally signed up for it. I thought I was getting a chair massage. And I just had an upsetting phone call right before then, so it worked out well. But what we used to do on our wellness day was go bowling. And so this was a whole different model. And it was just, even the people who were most resistant about the training loved the self-care day. So everyone seemed to buy into that. And maybe that's a good place to start, to introduce if you're bringing a program like this in.
Yeah, thanks for that. I just wanted to hear it from the participant perspective. We will be repeating that next year. And then I didn't put a slide in, but next year we're going to be doing circles with teachers. And we're going to have 2 topics in the circles. One of them is to explore deeply, what does it mean to have a culture of care, and to have teachers just express where they feel blocked with that, and even express where they don't feel cared for by the school itself. And then that's going to also lead into what other work do we need to do to build a trauma sensitive school community. So that'll be one choice for educators. And then the second choice is another program that Awaken runs, which is Mindful Connections for Bias Awareness. Since there's a predominantly white faculty and a predominantly student body of color, the superintendent really, really wants that to be offered as a thing people can choose, because if you're not ready to do that work, I think that's really counterproductive. So it is going to be a choice for folks. They can either work in the circles of care, and we are bringing in facilitators to work alongside us who do integrative community therapy. So we're not going to use that word directly to describe it, and it's not going to be exactly that, but it's going to teach a model of how to do a circle, similar to the way there's a way to do restorative circles. Integrative community therapy has a model on how to hold space for difficulty and provide a supportive community. So we're hoping that that modeling will translate to how the teachers also work with the kids. And so unfortunately, I'm going to skip the practice because we only have a couple minutes, but I want to just open it up and see if folks have other questions or comments that they want to share. Yeah, please just unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi, great. Thank you so much. I love the integration and depth, and clearly, well thought out, and you guys Great, great work. I'm a clinical psychologist, consulting, school-based mental health, do a lot of integrative work in the schools as well. And so very excited to see your model program here. Couple of practical, implementation or operational questions, if I may. I was wondering about utilization for the chill room and some of the other things and faculty, and you showed those numbers, so that was helpful. Any thoughts about how to increase, and you did talk about this in general in the PDs and other things, but other ways to keep promoting, faculty buy-in and lower the resistance and fear of being, called out for this stuff, or there's different layers to it, obviously, but any other thoughts on continuing to get, faculty to get that self-care that we're all bitching and moaning we don't have enough of, we don't have enough time and energy, but I don't have enough time and energy to get the time and energy, right? So this classic catch-22 we get caught in delivering these services. Any other brainstorming thoughts?
Yeah, and I honestly, I love that question. And it's always, the thing that's on my mind, because like my job is to try to get people to do more self-care, like that's my whole job. Like that's what I do every day. And one of the reasons we decided to do the circle format is because there has been kind of like something to do outside of the classes, like read something, try something out, try to implement. And we thought that creating a culture of care could really be, I'm hoping, like a place to just explore that in community, right? What does it mean to have a community of care? And of course, that care has to start with us, right? If we're not doing it for ourselves. And so my hope is that we've been giving them information, right, for 2 years now. And now I just want to hold space for integration.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anyone else has a different idea, but that's kind of where I came up with that idea in conversation with the administration, is like, let's just have circles. Let's just have people be together in caring community, right? Let's show them how to do that with a format, right? Let's teach them what that looks like, and let's just explore how we can all care for one another and ourselves.
Yeah, I scribbled down that prompt, those questions in a restorative support circle. I love that. So beautiful. Thank you. Yeah.
I can just say too, is continuing to bring the administration along. And when we say to staff, you can walk out if you're uncomfortable, that they have to feel that there's no repercussions for that, that they're not being watched or judged, or because that has come up. I'm on the union exec board, and that's come up. They tell us that we can walk out, but then we get in trouble if we're not there. And I had someone who in the middle of one of the trainings found out some bad news about his grandmother, and he said to me, is it okay? I said, please go take care of yourself. We have to support what we want to do and model what we're doing for students. We can't just have it be good for students and not the adults, because then there's resentment and there's hypocrisy there.
Absolutely. And if I can offer an idea along that line as well, which is kind of reframing the whole idea, like it's not necessarily walking out, right? It's not necessarily resistance or rejection. It's pause and be aware of what you need to take care of yourself right now. And whether you feel you can get your needs met in this room right now, great, or you're making a conscious choice to take care of your needs elsewhere. And then whether they need to write a note as to how they were taking care of their needs wherever they went next for accountability or something, right? So I don't know, playing around with a few ideas about that, because absolutely choice, invitational, not mandatory, is vital to this work. I agree with your general.
Yeah, and Stefanie's deliverers are excellent at that. In my first year, we had people standing up, walking around because they had back issues. Nobody felt uncomfortable. We had someone who fell asleep, and people were smiling, and he just looked and said, that's what she needs right now, and that's okay.
Beautiful,
and
right?
So she has phenomenal program deliverers who get that, and I think it's just bringing the administration along to support that as well.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
I just love what you said, Peter, because we talked about the resistance, and a couple of times I had to debrief with my program deliverers, like, this person was on their phone the whole time in class, so disrespectful, or these two people were talking. And what I said to them is like, if you think about, because we teach the window of tolerance, the Dan Siegel window of tolerance, I was like, those folks are doing what they need to do to put themselves back into a tolerance.
That's
And
right.
whatever you're talking about, like if you're talking about, one of our topics is forgiveness, right? When we talk about vulnerability,
Yeah.
that topic could be so triggering for someone that they need to figure out how to manage it, you know? And so that behavior that you're seeing, if we want our teachers to give that kind of cut that break to our students when they quote unquote misbehave, then we have to cut that break for our teachers.
Amen. Amen. And it's all about conscious choice, right?
That's right.
Mindfulness isn't meditating. Mindfulness, you can do anything mindfully. It's just,
That's
do you
right.
know you're doing it, right? Is it a conscious choice? So anyway, all right, this is
Yeah.
fun, playing
Yeah.
with the choir here together. So
Well,
thank
I
you.
guess the other thing that I just want to say about buy-in is that my hope is also that the transformation that's happening with the young people in those buildings, or in this, top floor, bottom floor, because they're separated out, that alone, like I have seen that in schools that I work with, that helps to shift the educator attitude about things for themselves sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So that's also my hope over time. Yeah.
A couple of the questions. I know we're out of, at the end of time, but if I may, I'll at least ask the big elephant in the room question, which is, of course, funding source, especially as you bring, again, I'm a mental health, community mental health provider, partnering with schools as we come in there, insurance-based, grant-based. How are you getting,
I'm going to let Will answer that.
the funding for your tier 2 and tier 3 services, in particular with your mental health clinicians?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, because that's always a concern. And so in this district, this is a district that has to make the decision on whether, they're painting a hallway or putting new carpet down, because they don't have any, the tax base, it doesn't support the needs of the school. And the way that the state of Pennsylvania distributes funding to school districts is really messed up too. So that doesn't help. And so this was an actual like miraculous event that happened at Clairton, because we were able to get I don't know how many partners there were. I'm going to say 6 or 7 maybe, philanthropic partners together to help really fund the tier 1 and 2. Folks out in the community that really came together and said, we need to do this for Clairton and for those kids. And we've been able to continue that, and we're going to continue to push hard with our state legislature to make sure we're telling the story and telling the success and letting them know that this has to be a program for everybody, not just the districts that can afford it. We're making great strides in Clairton, and it's of most vital importance that we can continue this work. Tier 3 is billable, because you're doing billable services. So hypothetically, that should cover costs. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, particularly with the school schedule. So sometimes we have to get creative. So, so there's a mixture of things. But I do have to say the school has also, when they can, given, also been able to put in for this as well.
Whenever we receive grants that can be used towards that, the administration will commit to that. But as Will mentioned, we're a very low income district. We have a neighboring district who shares a zip code with us. They just write it as a line item in their budget, and they can cover the whole cost of the chill program. But it's a story of the have and have nots, where, we don't even have enough teachers to cover all of the classes that we teach, and sometimes have to supplement with online school. And so it's just every little bit of money helps. But I have to tell you that Stepanie was phenomenal in helping us to apply for grants. She's very skilled at what she does. And without her support, and then with support from AHN, we all came together to help write grants. I never was a grant writer in my life, but we all supported each other. And I just think that school districts need to think about these partnerships, because you can't exist in isolation. It needs to be a community hub for kids, especially in a place like Clairton, when there is not much else. So we have an asthma clinic at our school. We have, full mental health support. That needs to be a place that we're serving the whole child. And so you have to have these partnerships, because it can't be done in isolation.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank
Maybe
you.
that's a really good note to end on. I don't know, Will, did you want to end with something else?
No, I think just the one last little tiny thing, and Maureen kind of hinted at it there, that it's really important to note that I want to say, I can't remember the exact statistic. I want to say 26 or 28% of Clareton kids have are qualified as having diagnosable asthma because they have a giant steel like coke works plant that sits right in the middle of the town. And there's significant environmental concerns that happen there. So you have like the community, the trauma, the violence, there's poverty, and you have this environmental concern that's just, I get out of my car there, you can smell the sulfur dioxide. It just cuts and it gets into school, and so you have that going on as well. So I think that's just important to note. That's a huge issue there.
You guys, I want to read this comment that Michelle left, and I think this relates to me also saying identify your advocates on campus or the campuses that you're working with, because she said sometimes you can get a teacher already teaching interested in mindfulness to incorporate it. She said, quotes, she snuck it into the curriculum this year, and I taught all mindfulness courses, no French, and counselors became mindfully certified. Next year, I will serve as the mindfulness director and teach. Note, I'm not a licensed mental health provider, but we have one at school. So it sounds like, Michelle, you're doing a lot of tier 1 work at your campus, which is awesome. So Peter, that may be something as you are creating partnerships and relationships, you're looking at who are your advocates on campus that could possibly, you could collaborate with in some way. Just another access point, as I like to say. Yeah.
We're looking for that as a next step to integrating mindfulness in the classrooms, is having these chill corners in the classroom so that they don't have to physically leave every time to go to a separate place, that we want them to learn to use those skills in the moment in the environment where they are. And so we're going to look for buy-in, those teachers that volunteer. So we're going to start there, and then hopefully it will catch on beyond those teachers.
Awesome. Thank you. It's been, I know we're past time. Just, I could literally talk about eat, breathe this stuff all day long, but I know everybody has commitments and lives to live. And I so much appreciate you, Maureen and Will and Stepanie, sharing your expertise, all the great work that you're doing, the collaboration that you have going on. You have really given so much information and inspiration. It feels like, I can't speak for everybody, but I'm getting that sense, definitely for me and those that are watching this later on our member site. So really, really am grateful for your presence and you sharing all the things that you shared tonight. So thank you all so much. And lots of love and, awesome sauce spark your way to finish your school year off on a really great note whenever that ends for you guys. So
Thanks so much for hosting us. It was great to be here.
yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.